Yeah, it was a month and a half, I think. Um, well, closer to 2 months, right? Yeah. It was. I actually caught COVID in that period for my fourth time.
I'm only up to 3 myself, so you're really kind of pioneering.
It's not like it was terrible, but it's not like your energy. It takes a while for your energy sort of to become back to normal. I still don't have the sense of like I lost my sense of taste for the second time, and it's back to a degree. You know, it's like you could taste, but it's really weird. Like my wife made some food, and it's like I don't taste any lemon in here.
Yeah, I've heard some, not COVID related, but I've heard some horror stories about people losing their sense of smell and just finding it extremely difficult to live. That's one that I think we take for granted.
Yeah. And you kind of smell awful things, but the delight you take in things is a little bit less. And it's also used very interesting. You have a tendency to salt your food more, which is not so great for you.
I mean, the smell thing is really interesting to me from the standpoint of how much of our memory is completely tied to smells and how much picking, I was in an elevator years ago and I smelled my grandmother's perfume. She had been dead for a long time. And that, I think there's something about smell that transports you faster than any other sense.
Yeah, that's what they say. And that there's some, like it's the closest to our emotions. Yeah, and we have very, very. I don't know. It's a very intense connection to memories and very intense connection to, this whole mystery of pheromones and why you're attracted to someone. Is, it's of course a whole panoply of, it's your taste, your looks. Stuff like that, but this is a whole nother thing that can be very, very strong.
You see animals, they just go up to each other and smell each other.
Yeah.
We like to consider ourselves better than that, but I don't think that at the end of the day we're really as far removed from that as we seem to think.
Well, they talk about that like a dog's sense of smell is the equivalent of the difference between very, very fuzzy, probably much more than this, VHS and 4K. And we're at VHS if we're lucky. So that they can hear it sort of like they're smelling things within things. And
yeah, it's like being able to see things in an extra dimension.
Yeah.
Where are you based these days?
I live in Marin County, north of San Francisco.
I'm from the East Bay originally, so I know it well. How long have you been out there?
Mid-90s. Pretty long time.
You basically went from being in a touring bands and then you moved out there right around the same time that the Heads kind of imploded? Well,
a little bit later. My wife and I had a beautiful loft on Prince Street. And she had a very bad experience with a homeless woman trying to stuff bloody bread into our 1-year-old daughter's mouth. And she kind of went, I don't know if we can really raise 3 kids here. And that plus the no way to predict how much money I'd be making, with Talking Heads being at the very least inactive at that moment, and then of course sort of more formally breaking up. And we wanted to be someplace where if we had to rely on the public schools, we'd be okay with it. As well as she really, she felt overwhelmed, and I didn't really want to leave, but then we found a beautiful house here that we really loved living in, and it was a kind of a wreck of a house, which we sort of wanted. We wanted to be able to make it our own taste and not be paying for somebody else's taste that we didn't really like. Actually, our house was written up in the New York Times in the home section.
That's a real badge of honor, yeah. I think.
It was on the cover of the pictures of it were on the cover of the home section. I can't, 96 or something like that.
So when you say Prince Street, you're talking Manhattan.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, Marin, all of that area north of San Francisco has changed quite a bit in the past, 10 to 15 years. But was that a difficult transition, having been in the city for so long?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I miss the intensity of New York and the idea of it being open all the time, and the convenience of that. But I grew up in the Midwest, and then I went to college at Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I've lived all these different places, and I saw things I really liked about each one of them. And when I came here, it was like, okay, well, I'm exchanging this sort of intensity of the city for the intensity of nature, and we also had something like, we kind of experimented with coming out here, and we lived on houseboats, which was quite an adventure. And we would go down to, you must know this then since you're from the East Bay, but I think it's 11th Street where Slim's and Paradise and DNA are. And we'd walk down the street and like doorman would go like, "Hey Jerry, you want to come in?" and stuff like that. And we'd be like, "God, this is great. This doesn't really even happen in New York, this kind of open arms attitude." So it made us feel kind of at home immediately. And we live actually in county property, like sort of looking at the ocean up on Panoramic Highway. And there was sort of the feeling, it's also, I have a feeling that I'm going to start exercising and be healthier here. And it'll probably prolong my life or make my life better. And then I became a producer. And one of the reasons we moved here is that because of the Summer of Love, there was like people had invested in recording equipment. There were studios and people that could fix things. And I also had a relationship with the sort of marriage of computers and synthesizers and then digital recording. So I was very good friends with Dave Smith, the founder of Sequential Circuits. I was good friends with Evan and Peter Gotcher at Digidesign, the people at EMU. Roger Lynn moved up here. And frankly, it was a sense that there was an excitement that you really didn't have in New York. You didn't have this excitement about technology and excitement about new ideas. One of the things that I've always, it's not perfect, but the people who have sort of said, I want to be the founder of a company, I want to come up with an idea, is it's sort of like people are getting rich because they came up with something that no one thought people would really need or want, and then they did. Having lived in the East Coast and the Midwest, I saw an awful lot of people that wealth was created by maybe taking over a company and laying off half of the people. I had enough sort of left-wing politics when I was in college. I went like, boy, that's a really a quandary of a moral dilemma, we'll say. And this sort of cleaner idea, really, it's sort of, I would say the beginning of this is Edmund Land at Polaroid. He came up with instant photography and created a business that had never existed.
Yeah, they were in Boston, right?
They're from Boston, yeah. And of course, Kurzweil's from there, too. And Kurzweil, I worked for a software development company called Cambridge Computer. This is way before Apple existed or Microsoft existed. And I worked on the DEC PDP-8, the PDP-11, and on mainframes at Wang Computer Center. And then Wang came out with their word processor, but there was this idea of the fervency of like a brand new idea. And so I kind of was excited by that. And that made it easier to give up what I loved about New York, is that there was something special about San Francisco. And I also knew that there was going to be a continuing collision between music and computers. And this would be at the forefront of it. And maybe I'd want to be involved in that. So that was part of it too.
So if we're talking way before Apple computers, then we're also talking way before the Talking Heads, I would imagine.
Yes, it was before the Talking Heads that I worked for Cambridge. After the Modern Lovers and before the Talking Heads.
I should know the answer to this, but how long of a period were you in the Modern Lovers? I know it's just that one album.
I was there from 1971 to 1970, like early in 1974.
So that's a fairly substantial amount of time. Like certainly when you're that age, right? 3 years is when you're younger. After Jonathan Richman kind of goes off and continues to do his own thing, did it seem like music wasn't going to be a viable option for you?
Yes. I mean, I had sort of tried to, find another band or do something. I always thought that I had not thought when I went off to college that I would be a professional musician. And then I met Jonathan, and I realized that my thinking about music and my style of playing fit with what he was doing, and that nobody in the world was doing anything like that. And to a degree, when I joined the Talking Heads, my style and my thinking about music really matched theirs well enough, and certainly was adaptable to very quickly be immediately like a seamless transition for them. And I think that they had other people, I guess, try out for them who were somewhat sort of tried to show off on how much they could play. And they would go like, yeah, but it doesn't sound like our music anymore. It's all covered up by this other music. And my attitude was much more as, how do I reinforce what is here? And so in a way, I had to wait around for the world to catch up to the ideas, because it really is true that the Modern Lovers, at the very least, anticipated sort of the ethos of punk music. You could say we were one of the first punk bands. Some people would take it back to the Velvet Underground or the Stooges, but I think the Modern Lovers, in some ways, is a little bit more direct, because it's sort of like we absolutely have something we want to say. We're very passionate about saying it, and we're going to find a very simple and direct way to express this. And it was in contrast, of course, to standing against bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Yes, the sort of excesses of prog rock. I mean, I had been a big fan of the Soft Machine, and I think that prog rock in the very beginning was interesting, but then it became, every song was 15 minutes long. Everybody had studied at music academies. The lights were excessive. I mean, everything about it was excessive rock, so to speak. Or you might say mannerist, if you're a painter. And so the Modern Lovers were like, no, we're going back to basics. And of course, punk was exactly the same thing.
That's really interesting, because I've heard that discussed a lot on an intellectual level. Certainly when you're talking about musical movements, people frame it as being a reaction to something, but I guess I never considered it sort of that literal or that direct, or that you as a band were so conscious of the direction that things were going in that you were actively trying to push against it.
I think that Jonathan was, Jonathan was performing these songs before I joined the band, and David had already joined him. I think he very much wanted attention and said, if you're doing this, if you're going left, I'm going right. And I think that had to do with his frustrations in high school. I think that, I would say that Gordon Gano of the Violent Femmes and Jonathan on that first Modern Lovers record probably conveyed teenage frustration or angst as well as they've ever been. And why those albums live on year after year. I mean, I think you know that I produced the third Violent Femmes album. And, they keep having a new audience regenerate. And it's because they sang songs about those frustrations that every teenager, who struggles with, how do I remain popular, or can I be popular, or what is it like to not be popular, or, I can't get a girlfriend, or whatever. They really, frustrations with your parents. And I think Jonathan caught that too. Not absolutely as literally as Gordon, but two amazing songwriters, and I'm delighted and proud that I've been able to work with them. Have you heard the newer albums I've done with Jonathan?
I have, yeah.
Great. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of his work, and until today, he's a very idiosyncratic, both artist and person. You know, I've heard some interesting stories about people interacting with him personally. But did you get what he was doing pretty much immediately?
I'm not sure I saw it as he did. I was making a film. I met Jonathan, and I was making a film about alienation for a documentary film class that I had in college. And Jonathan seemed like the antidote to, or he took strength from the very things that I felt these other people that I interviewed were feeling were beating them down, which was sort of the commercialization of life. And he talked about how much he loved the Howard Johnson road sign or the Esso, and how much he hated, but also
that Circle K song. And
yeah, but on the other hand, he hated the modernization that was taking place. He hated Exxon. He liked Esso. It was a more organic and more, the 40s and 50s logos that were starting to change in the 60s. He liked the older ones, and he felt that there was emotion in them that was being pushed out, that Exxon, that they had done research to make sure that it wasn't a bad word in any other language. But, what you now do, you come up with it. I am involved, I co-founded a pharmaceutical company that has a antidote for snake bites, and we were going through names for the product. And the whole thing was, it can't mean something in any other language that, is bad. It can't overly suggest a cure for what you're doing, because then the FDA won't do it. Well, you end up with these bizarre words because of that it's the process of elimination that gets you to the word, rather than something that's like the process of like, that would be really cool. I mean, Esso stands for SO, Standard Oil, and that's where it comes from. So it's very simple. Right? Where
does the pharmaceutical bit come in all of this?
Well, I happened to meet this guy. I had a party, and I had met a bunch of neuroscientists, and I said, God, there's a lot of smart people here. I said, does anyone have any great ideas I haven't done anything with? And that was 11 years ago. And I thought that it was going to be a nonprofit and that we would hand off. It was a different idea at that moment to the Gates Foundation. And a friend of mine had recently taken over, been the head of agriculture there. And I thought, well, this will help the world. But it'll be 6 months of work, Well, it ended up it wasn't something for them. And so we pressed on. But it is a remarkable thing. So mosquitoes kill the most people. Humans are next. Well, malaria, dengue fever, there's other things too. And then humans kill the next amount of people. And then snakes. Snakes are third. Snakes kill 125,000 people every year and maim 500,000 to 1 million people. And what we have is what we think is going to completely change it. So it's very exciting. It's one of the things that moving to San Francisco and the startup communities, I kind of feel that having a startup became almost like what being a musician was when I was in the 60s and 70s, of like aspiring to changing the culture and I think that music, as it became more ubiquitous, and that I don't think it has the same link to your personality that it once did. I think it's a little bit more the background of people's lives. I have to say that actually I think this tour has been successful partially because it works best when we get a mixed age audience, and you see people loving the music in their 60s all the way to people who are teenagers, and And there's a joy. There's just a joy about the music that comes through.
I think it was Chris that brought you over to the Talking Heads. Is that right?
He was the one who reached out to me, yes.
Again, you ended up with these two, I'll just use the word idiosyncratic characters again. What was that experience like going from a Jonathan Richman to a David Byrne?
Well, there was a time, obviously there was a time in between it that we talked about, but it was very different because the Talking Heads were in their late 20s, and Jonathan had just entered his 20s. So there was an innocence to Jonathan and a sophistication to the Talking Heads that were very different. Jonathan is really smart and a really advanced thinker. You are very different no matter how smart you are when you're 21 than you are when you're 29. So one of the things about the Talking Heads is that the business was much more together. They just had some good advice, and they were very sensible at certain decisions they were making. And I think that because of certain decisions that did not work well for the Modern Lovers, I had a perspective that helped frame decisions that we had to make as a group, as the Talking Heads, and we made successful decisions and didn't. I think one of the biggest things that can happen to bands is bad business decisions can. Anything that interrupts the flow and growth of a band is, it's a fragile thing for it to succeed. You not only have to have great talent, great songs, be at the right time, but a lot of things have to happen also too. And, one of the things that happened with the Modern Lovers that was bad is that we had in Jonathan someone who was always being creative and growing, and he was going to obviously grow into new places. And we had in David someone who wanted perfection. And I think that Ernie and I were sort of in between, although I think I probably was more where Jonathan was because I was more about improvising. So David really brought that sensibility to the Cars. Even like some of the bass parts he suggested to Ernie, the eighth notes, that is like bubblegum music, like the Archies, like boom, 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 boom. If you listen to all the Cars' early songs, that's exactly how they go. And he wanted Ernie to play that simply because he thought it was so direct. Whereas, was that the right decision for the Modern Lovers? I don't know, but it was the record that ended up coming out and influencing people was a demo tape that we made. So the funny thing is had it not come out when it came out, it might have just come and went. Because even though record companies were very excited about us, growing that audience that we had was going to be a challenge at that time period because we were so against the sort of zeitgeist of the moment, which is what made us so refreshing and exciting to record companies. If they saw us in the right place where the audience reacted in a certain way, they would go like, "Oh, they're going to change the world." But it would have been a lot of work. So anyway, so back to what you said. So David and Jonathan both were very, very driven and very sort of ingenious writers of lyrics, very keen observers of the world they lived in, but with very, very different sensibilities about it.
In reading and listening to some interviews with you specifically around this tour, I went back and watched the Rome 1980 concert that, was really effectively the model for this entire thing. And it's really striking to me. Obviously, there's a lot of, joy emanating from the band with all the singers and, everybody on stage, but it's really Adrian that is, it's really him that is bringing in this just like pure sense of joy that is maybe, obviously an incredibly talented player, but maybe is to a certain extent outside of those sort of strict structures that you were talking about.
There's an element that when Adrian plays the guitar, it's like he's taming a wild beast. And that's very exciting to people. And he is completely unique. And I felt that when I began thinking about this, and then Adrian and I were talking about it, I felt that it really needed to be both of us. I mean, I put that band together, so I felt a sense of ownership of that first tour that, David became much more involved, and obviously with the sort of finale being Stop Making Sense, where he, was very much about designing what it looked like and the lighting, the moving of the stage, all of those things. But it was just about the music in 1980 and about putting together this unbelievable band, which I had hired. So I felt this sense of connection and ownership to that sort of incarnation of the expanded Talking Heads. I think Adrian's essential, but I don't think Adrian, it wouldn't, there's other places in his trio and in King Crimson where he plays amazing solos, but it doesn't have that joy that band had. So I think that there's that sense of the rhythmic excitement and just, people just having this like, God, is this a lot of fun to be playing this together.
There's a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, I know Chris kind of refuted it in his book, but that Adrian was being seriously considered in that period as you were kind of transitioning from the Talking Heads to the Heads, and that he sort of outright refused. Now, obviously, he's there singing all these songs. I mean, did he have any misgivings, sort of taking up that place and being effectively, being one of two or the front man for this tour?
Well, I think Adrian sings the most songs, but I'm singing songs, and Josh is singing songs, and then Sammy and Shira are singing lead on one song, but we've also made the songs more about group singing at times rather than one personality. I mean, sometimes we follow the arrangements more exactly, but we didn't ever think anybody could replace David, and so we wanted to. What song did you feel that you could bring your own personality to? So I think that Adrian thinks of it that way. Because I love these songs and I love playing them, and I'm happy singing some of these songs. I've sung other people's songs before, but it's like I don't see him as the front man. I see us both as front people, but also shared definitely with Josh and Shira and Sammy. And one of the other great things about this is like arranging these songs with a horn section is totally different. And same thing is like we're doing Felahun Ginji. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, from Discipline, and we're doing Rev It Up, and we're doing a version of Slippery People. I had played Slippery People with Mavis Staples and Turquoise, which was what Cool 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 used to be, with the addition of Dave and Taylor, that they had done Slippery People, and I thought, well, we have two girl singers, why don't we do that version? And of course, everybody in the band knew it, so we want, as I said, the blueprint is the 1980 show, but we also we are casting a nod to where Adrian and I went after that period, and also let's feature what Cool 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 is. And I actually had a very interesting conversation with Larry Mullen, who came to the show in New York, and I was talking about the joy that we'd had when we played Hardly Strictly, which was amazing because it was 55,000 people, and of course everybody's in a good mood. It's a lovely fall afternoon in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park, and it's a free concert. So why wouldn't you be in a good mood? But it was a really amazing feeling being there. And Larry was saying, I'm not sure that you felt exactly the same thing in the Talking Heads because of the focus that people have on David's unique personality. That was going along with being in the mood of the music. Whereas our show is less focused on Adrian's personality or mine. I mean, yes, we're singing the song, But I think it's more holistic. It's more about, I love these songs, I remember these songs, or I just heard this album, and God, is it great to see it performed really well and live right in front of me.
The stakes are different too. I mean, the first time around, there's obviously a tremendous amount of pressure. Specifically with the Talking Heads, there's all this buzz building. I assume that every single record label, every single executive at a record label has their opinion what to do, and then obviously at a certain point, things get a little fractured and frayed. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it wasn't as easy to just have that pure sense of enjoyment that you're able to have now.
Well, I think there's pressure now, too, because we have a lot to live up to. And we had to find a way to do this that we felt like if we had ownership over it and were respectful of what we're referencing. Obviously it was a big part of my life, and that tour was a very important tour in Adrian's life, and one that he looks back on. And, you were talking about, he said one of the great things that he loves about playing this tour is that when he goes out with his trio, like all the pressure's on him nonstop. He sings every song. He plays every solo. He does Whereas here, he's like a guitar slinger. He comes in and out. He sings a few songs. But there's other places that are more relaxing. Places where he says, there's really not even a part for me to play. I'll just sit here, and when my background part comes in, I'll come and sing it. And so there's a freedom and a joy with that. He's also not using his most modern rig on this. He's not, it's not that he's absolutely recreated what he used in 1980, but it's still, it's a stripped down and more of a, no synth guitar, for instance, or various other things that he would employ nowadays. No loops and all these other things that technology expanded and allowed guitar players to do.
Obviously, 1996 until now, more or less, is an incredible amount of time to go without doing this thing that had been such an essential part of your life for so long. Now that you're back doing it and you've had success, and it sounds like you've, again, been able to connect with maybe even a new level of joy in performing live on stage. Do you see yourself continuing to perform live, to go out on tour after this tour ends?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure. I think that I have to feel that what I'm doing is that I'm really excited and proud of it. I do think that I've written enough songs, and I could imagine doing more of that, I could easily do it. I did a tour with Casual Gods, and then I did that tour with Chris and Tina on the Escape from New York tour. So, reapproaching my solo catalog and other songs, I certainly have learned things about singing, being a producer. It was very interesting how producing and thinking about music practically every day of my life very intensely taught me things about my own playing that I didn't learn by playing. And it was, I might have learned it had I devoted myself to playing from when I started really concentrating on being a producer. But, I was in charge of all sorts of different kinds of musicians. And what I loved about being a producer is, I produced an album that sort of ventured into the world of country music. And I don't think I'd have ever done that myself, really. Someone that's more metal than I would have probably ever done, or more this way, or more that way. And being a producer, you go like, well, I have ideas about this, and now I have someone else's voice, or their guitar style, or their keyboard style, or their drum style that I can help influence, and my ideas can be expressed by someone who can do it because they live that life, or they live that ethos in a way that I don't. So I did like that. I sure have loved performing again, and it's been a challenge to get myself in shape for it, so to speak. And, it's like last year we did 5 shows, and this year we did 5 shows in 5 days. And That's actually more days in a row than we normally do in Talking Heads. So that was a challenge. You have to keep yourself healthy.
There are some outliers, some cases, Rolling Stones probably being the most famous of them. But at a certain point, and I talked to a lot of bands about this, every artist has that, they all have that conversation of how much longer is this feasible? Will there come a point when, we can't physically do this anymore? And, I suspect, I could be wrong, but I suspect that you're at a point now where it's like, I enjoy this thing. This was such a big part of my life. We're all on finite timelines that, maybe it makes sense to go and re-engage with it.
Yeah. Well, I try to keep myself interested. I mean, we sort of went off on the snakebite company. I like new challenges. I like getting involved with scientists, because when I first went to college, I thought I was going to be a scientist. And then I decided, no, I want to be an artist or an architect or a musician. And it's been great to sort of like push myself to go like, I got to learn about chemistry, or I have to learn about physics. Or I was on the board of directors of a microprocessor design company, and I had to learn all. And then we were in a gigantic lawsuits, and I learned all this stuff about the law and I like that. I like it makes you a better conversationalist, among other things. But I'm not so obsessed with music that it's the only thing I want to be thinking about. I like challenges, and I like thinking about different things, and I like trying to have success doing different things. I'm sort of disappointed. I used to paint at one point, and I have never taken it back up. And I thought, I kind of wish I'd done that, or maybe I'll still do that.
It would have been a good pandemic project.
Yes, it would be. It would have been. And actually, Adrian took up a painting program, and during the pandemic. My wife and I designed the house we live, redesigned it, and that was a great project. I was in architecture school when I left to join the Talking Heads, and I think I would have really loved architecture. That was like two, it was sort of like both of these paths are really interesting. One thing I knew is that that by the time I was invited to join the Talking Heads, it's like, it's a young man's game being in a rock band, and so I got to do this now. And if it doesn't work out, I guess I could come back to architecture. It couldn't be the other way around. So, and it was funny. Of course, when I announced that I was leaving architecture school, all of my professors said, "Well, like when you make a lot of money, you know where to come. I'll help you design your house."